Pearl Harbor, December 7th, 1941. Japanese aircraft destroy 8 battleships, kill 2,400 Americans, cripple the Pacific Fleet. In Tokyo, military leaders celebrate. They've neutralized America's Navy, bought themselves time. The war is winnable now. But 3 aircraft carriers weren't at Pearl Harbor that day. They're at sea, hunting. And in Detroit, Pittsburgh, and Seattle, American factories are about to start running 24 hours a day. Women, immigrants, and retirees will build more planes in the next 4 years than Japan had built in its entire history. Japan's military leaders think they've won the opening battle. They have no idea what's coming. Before we dive in, pause for a second. Make a prediction. Could Japan have won the Pacific War? Or was December 7th, 1941 the moment they sealed their fate? Keep that answer in your head. By the end, you might change your mind. If you're into history that digs into economics and power instead of just battles, hit subscribe. To understand why Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, you need to understand the trap Japan was in: the oil crisis. By 1941, Japan had been fighting in China for 4 years. The war was a meat grinder, hundreds of thousands of casualties, no end in sight. And Japan was running out of oil. 80% of Japan's oil came from imports, most of it from the United States. In July 1941, after Japan occupied French Indochina, President Franklin Roosevelt froze Japanese assets in the United States. Britain and the Dutch government in exile did the same. The result? A total oil embargo. Japan's military had enough oil reserves for maybe 18 months of operations. After that, the Imperial Japanese Navy would be immobilized, docked in port. Useless. The choice was stark. They could withdraw from China, negotiate with the United States, accept the humiliation, and watch the military government collapse under the weight of that failure. Or they could go all in. Seize the oil fields of the Dutch East Indies. Secure the resources Japan needed to continue the war. And hope the gamble paid off. But there was a problem. If Japan invaded the Dutch East Indies, the United States would almost certainly intervene. American forces in the Philippines sat right across Japan's supply lines. The U.S. Pacific Fleet at Pearl Harbor could strike Japanese convoys at will. Japan couldn't secure the southern oil fields without neutralizing American power in the Pacific. So, they decided to strike first. The plan. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, commander of Japan's combined fleet, had studied at Harvard. He'd served as a naval attaché in Washington. He knew America, and he knew Japan couldn't win a long war. In 1940, he told Prime Minister Fumimaro Konoe, "If we are ordered to fight, I can guarantee to put up a tough fight for the first 6 months. But I have absolutely no confidence as to what would happen if it went on for 2 or 3 years. Yamamoto understood the math. America had twice as many people. Its economy was 5 to 7 times larger. And those American steel mills. They were producing 13 times more steel than all of Japan combined. But Japanese military planners believed they had a window. The theory: hit the U.S. Pacific Fleet hard enough to cripple it for 6 to 12 months. In that time, seize the Dutch East Indies, Malaya, the Philippines, Wake Island, Guam. Build a defensive perimeter across the Pacific. When the Americans finally counterattacked, they'd face fortified islands, extended supply lines, and a veteran Japanese navy. The cost in American blood would be enormous. Eventually, war-weary Americans would negotiate. Japan would keep its conquests. The war would end on favorable terms. This wasn't a plan to conquer the United States. It was a plan to make the war too expensive for America to continue. It required one critical assumption: that Americans lacked the will to fight a long, brutal war in the Pacific. That assumption was catastrophically wrong. December 7, 1941, 6:20 a.m. Hawaiian time. The first wave of Japanese aircraft, 183 planes, launches from 6 aircraft carriers 230 miles north of Oahu. 7:48 a.m. The attack begins. Japanese torpedo bombers and dive bombers hit Battleship Row. The USS Arizona explodes after a bomb penetrates its magazine, igniting over 1 million pounds of ammunition. 1,177 crew members die in minutes. The USS Oklahoma takes 9 torpedoes and capsizes, trapping 429 men inside. Within 2 hours, 8 battleships are sunk or damaged, 188 American aircraft destroyed, 2,403 Americans dead. Japan loses 29 aircraft, 5 midget submarines, and 130 men. Tokyo celebrates. In the short term, it looks like a stunning success. The US battleship fleet is crippled. Japan's southern offensive can proceed unopposed. But there are problems. The 3 American aircraft carriers, Enterprise, Lexington, and Saratoga, weren't at Pearl Harbor. Enterprise was delayed by weather. Lexington was delivering aircraft to Midway. Saratoga was in San Diego. All 3 survived. And here's what the Japanese bombers missed. Pearl Harbor's massive fuel storage tanks holding millions of gallons of oil sit intact. The repair docks that will raise and rebuild those sunken battleships are undamaged. The submarine base that will launch the most devastating undersea campaign in history is fully operational. Japan sank the ships, but they left the infrastructure that would bring them back. Most critically, American public opinion, which had been divided about entering the war, unified instantly. The next day, President Roosevelt asked Congress for a declaration of war. The Senate voted 82-0. The House of Representatives 388-1. The lone dissenter was Jeanette Rankin of Montana, the first woman ever elected to Congress. She'd also voted against entering World War I. She voted her conscience, but she stood alone. America wasn't going to negotiate. America was going to fight, and that changed everything. But here's the thing. Japan's leaders didn't fully understand. The question wasn't whether Japan's military was good. It was. Japanese pilots were among the best in the world. The Mitsubishi Zero fighter was superior to anything the Americans had in 1941. The question was, could Japan outproduce the United States? Because modern wars aren't won by tactics, they're won by factories. Let's look at the numbers, the real numbers, the ones that decided the war before a single shot was fired. Start with steel. Steel is the foundation of everything in modern war. Ships, tanks, aircraft, ammunition. You can't fight without it. In 1941, American steel mills were producing 75 million tons per year. Japan managed 7 million. Think about that ratio, 13-1. In 1 month, America produced more steel than Japan produced in an entire year. Oil tells the same story, but worse for Japan. The United States was pumping over 1 billion barrels of oil out of the ground every year. Texas, California, Oklahoma. The oil just kept coming. Japan? Almost nothing. They were importing everything. And after Pearl Harbor, even the oil fields they captured in the Dutch East Indies didn't solve the problem. Allied forces sabotaged the wells before retreating. It took months to get them working again. And Japan never had enough tankers to ship the oil back home. American submarines made sure of that. Now look at the people. America had 132 million citizens. Japan had 73 million, nearly twice the population, twice the workforce, twice the number of potential soldiers, and an economy 5 times larger. But here's where it gets really stark. Aircraft. Between 1941 and 1945, American factories built 354,000 aircraft. Fighters, bombers, torpedo planes, reconnaissance aircraft, 354,000. Japan, over the same period, built 76,000. Let me put that in perspective. In 1944 alone, at peak production, the United States built 96,000 aircraft in a single year. That's more than Japan built during the entire war. Japan's best year? 28,000 aircraft. The United States was building planes 3 times faster, every single year. Warships. The gap in shipbuilding is almost absurd. From 1941 to 1945, the United States launched 147 aircraft carriers, fleet carriers, light carriers, escort carriers, 147. Japan built 18. Picture this. It's 1943. Japan has 3 aircraft carriers under construction. At the exact same time, American shipyards have 22 Essex-class fleet carriers under construction. In the 3 years after Midway, Japan completed 6 carriers. The United States completed 17. And carriers are just the beginning. America also built 2,700 Liberty ships during the war. Cargo vessels, transports, supply ships. That's 3 new ships every 2 days, on average, for 4 years straight. Japan couldn't match it. Not even close. This wasn't a contest. It was a mismatch of historic proportions. Japan's strategy rested on one assumption. Americans would see the cost, get tired, and quit. This wasn't entirely irrational. Japan had fought the Russian Empire in 1904 and 1905. Russia was larger, more populous, and had more resources. But after Japan destroyed the Russian Baltic Fleet at the Battle of Tsushima, Russia negotiated peace. The war was expensive. The Russian population was exhausted. Tsar Nicholas II accepted a settlement. Japan thought the same logic would apply to the United States. This was a catastrophic misreading of American political culture. The United States in 1941 wasn't Tsarist Russia in 1905. America was a democracy, yes, but Pearl Harbor unified the country in a way Japan didn't anticipate. The attack wasn't seen as a military setback. It was seen as a betrayal, a sneak attack while diplomats were still negotiating in Washington. Americans didn't want negotiations. They wanted revenge, and America had the industrial base to get it. But there's another problem Japan didn't foresee. The war in the Pacific wasn't Japan's only concern. Germany was fighting the Soviet Union. If the Soviets collapsed, Germany would dominate Europe. Japan would be isolated, facing Britain and the United States alone. Japan needed Germany to win in Europe, or at least to keep the Soviets and British fully occupied. But Germany declared war on the United States 4 days after Pearl Harbor. Suddenly, America wasn't just fighting Japan. It was fighting Germany and Italy too. And here's the critical point. The United States had enough industrial capacity to fight both. American strategists decided early on, Germany first. Defeat the most dangerous enemy, then turn full attention to Japan. Japan was facing a fraction of American power, and it was still losing. Midway, June 1942. 6 months after Pearl Harbor, Japan's offensive had been stunningly successful. The Philippines fell, Malaya fell, Singapore fell, the Dutch East Indies fell. Japan controlled a vast empire, but it needed to eliminate the American carrier threat. The target, Midway Island, 1,300 miles northwest of Hawaii. Force the U.S. carriers into a decisive battle. Destroy them. Admiral Yamamoto led a massive fleet, 4 aircraft carriers, hundreds of aircraft, battleships, cruisers. It was the most powerful naval force Japan had ever assembled. The Americans had 3 carriers, Enterprise, Hornet, and Yorktown. Yorktown had been damaged at the Battle of the Coral Sea a month earlier, but Navy repair crews worked around the clock to get her operational. American codebreakers had intercepted Japanese communications. They knew the attack was coming. They knew the target. On June 4, American dive bombers caught 3 Japanese carriers, Akagi, Kaga, and Soryu, with their decks full of armed and fueled aircraft. In 5 minutes, all 3 carriers were burning wrecks. A 4th carrier, Hiryu, was sunk later that day. In one day, Japan lost 4 fleet carriers, the core of its striking power. Over 250 aircraft gone, more than 3,000 men killed, including over 200 of the most experienced pilots and aircrew in the Imperial Navy. The Americans lost Yorktown and 1 destroyer. That was it. Japan never recovered. The Midway carriers weren't just ships. They were the veteran core of Japan's naval aviation. The pilots who'd trained for years. The mechanics who knew the aircraft inside and out. You can build a carrier in a year. You can't train a carrier pilot in a year. And this is where the production gap becomes devastating in a different way. The pilot training crisis. In 1941, Japanese naval pilots entered combat with an average of 700 flight hours of training. American pilots at the start of the war had about 150 hours. Japan had better pilots, better aircraft, better tactics, but by mid-1944, everything had reversed. New Japanese pilots were graduating with 40 hours of flying time. 40 hours, barely enough to take off and land safely. American pilots by mid-1944 had at least 525 hours of flight training. Japan couldn't replace its experienced pilots. America was training them faster than they could be killed. The Philippine Sea, June 1944. By mid-1944, the American counteroffensive was in full swing. U.S. forces were closing in on the Mariana Islands, Saipan, Tinian, Guam. Japan launched a massive carrier strike. 9 carriers, over 400 aircraft. American fighters flying the new F-6F Hellcat tore through the Japanese formations. In what American pilots called the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, Japan lost over 600 aircraft in 2 days. For comparison, that's more planes than Japan built in an entire year at peak production. American losses, 123 aircraft. It wasn't even close. By this point, the U.S. Navy had 18 fleet and light carriers in the Pacific. Japan had 9. But numbers don't tell the full story. American carriers were equipped with radar. American pilots had hundreds of hours of training. American aircraft were being replaced faster than they could be shot down. Japan's carriers had inexperienced pilots, obsolete aircraft, and no way to replace losses. In the last 8 months of the war, the US Navy lost only 2 dive bombers and 5 torpedo planes in aerial combat. The Imperial Japanese Navy still existed on paper, but as a fighting force, it was finished. Here's the fundamental reality. Japan's strategy required the United States to quit, but the United States doesn't quit wars it's committed to, especially wars that start with a surprise attack killing thousands of Americans. Even if every Japanese tactical decision had been perfect, even if Midway had gone differently, even if Japanese pilots had been better trained, it wouldn't have mattered. Because wars of attrition are won by whoever can replace losses faster. And Japan couldn't do that. Let's say Japan had won at Midway, sunk all 3 American carriers, killed thousands more US sailors. What happens next? American shipyards start building replacements. Training schools graduate new pilots, and the counter-offensive keeps coming relentless because the industrial base behind it is untouchable. Japan's economy was running at maximum capacity by 1943. Factories were working around the clock. Civilian production had been stripped to nothing. Every resource was going to the military, and it still wasn't enough. The United States in 1943 and 1944 was fighting a 2-ocean war, sending massive supplies to Britain and the Soviet Union, equipping millions of soldiers, building thousands of ships and aircraft, and American production kept growing. By 1945, more than half of all industrial production in the world was taking place in the United States. The lesson. Yamamoto knew this. That's why his quote about 6 months was so prophetic. He told the Japanese government, "I can run wild for 6 months to a year. After that, I have no expectation of success." Battle of Midway, June 1942, exactly 6 months after Pearl Harbor. Yamamoto was right. It's documented that Yamamoto spent the day after Pearl Harbor sunk in apparent depression while his staff celebrated. He knew, viscerally, that he had just guaranteed Japan's defeat. But Japan attacked anyway, because the alternative, withdrawing from China, accepting the oil embargo, watching the military government lose face, was politically impossible. So Japan bet on American war weariness leading to a negotiated peace. It was the wrong bet, not because American soldiers were braver or because American generals were smarter, but because American factories could replace losses faster than Japan could inflict them. Wars of attrition are won by the side that can replace losses faster, and in 1941, that side was the United States. Not even close. Here's my question for you. Japan's leadership knew the math. Yamamoto explicitly warned them. The oil embargo left them 18 months before the Navy stopped moving. They attacked anyway. Was Pearl Harbor a rational calculation, a desperate gamble, or strategic suicide? Leave your answer in the comments. This is one of those questions where smart people disagree completely, and I want to know where you stand. This isn't just about World War II. This is about what happens when nations make decisions based on hope instead of math, when ideology overrides industrial reality, when leaders choose war knowing they'll probably lose. Japan tried to win an economic war against an adversary that could replace 10 tanks for everyone Japan built. It was never a contest. It was never even close. If this changed how you think about history, hit that like button. Subscribe for more deep dives into the systems that actually shape the world. Thanks for watching.